What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Quint Studer, a straight-up legend in the healthcare industry who has taken his passion for community so seriously, he even became co-owner of the minor league baseball team, the Blue Wahoos, in his hometown of Pensacola, Florida. Quint is founder of the healthcare consulting company Studer Group, which works with organizations around the world to help them achieve and sustain clinical and financial improvement. His travels have led him to many communities. Quint studied why some communities were successful and others were not. He has published more than a dozen books, including his best-selling Busy Leaders Handbook. I'm excited to learn how athletics has shaped his leadership journey. I have my notepad ready, and I hope you do too.
The key is take complexity and you make it simple. Somebody can probably do 2 behavioral changes at a time and have success. When you put the third one in, you cut the success ratio in half. When you put the fourth one in, you drop it all the way down to maybe a 1 in 4 chance of success. You might know there are going to be 6 things they have to do, but you break it down into just, here's the first. Is it doable? Can I execute? Can I do it over and over again? To any skill.
Quint, thanks for joining us.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. It's an honor. I feel like I've entered the Hall of Fame talking to you, Don Yeager.
Oh my gosh, you got this author thing down. You can know exactly how to penetrate my heart. Studying your story, your life, and how much fun it's been to grow to know you better just through research. I know you grew up in Brookfield, Illinois.
Yes.
When someone lives right there, close proximity to Chicago, the first thing I always ask is Cubs or White Sox?
White Sox.
I heard that, and now I'm a Cubs guy, so we'll get this out.
I'm always like to go against the grain, and if I was probably New York, I probably would have went Nets. I just like being a little bit on the contrarian side, but I did like the Cubs too because, in fact, I saw the 1969 opening game, which was one of the best games ever at the Cubs ballpark. Because when I came home from school, because I love baseball, you run home and you turn on Jack Brickhouse.
Yeah. But as I'm reading about you and your love of the White Sox, I read about the visits as a family and with others that you would take to Comiskey. Tell me about baseball and family life in the Studer household.
Well, we grew up in Brookfield, Illinois, and we had an empty field next to us. Was great because, back in those days, that's where you went and messed around and played baseball. My dad worked at Electromotive, which was a part of GM that built diesel engines at the time. We were right by a quarry and the train tracks. One of the taverns there was called Bukovich's. It's still there. It's like the grandchildren run it. Every Sunday, if you got to Bukovich's Tavern at a certain time, they'd either hop on a bus or hop in cars and they'd go to a White Sox game. My parents, they didn't go with me, but they took me to Bukovich's. There's a little well-beaten path between the tavern and our backyard. And we would hop on a bus and I'd go to a White Sox game. And the big thing was periodically Sherm Lawler and Jim Landis would stop at Bukovich's Tavern because they lived in the area. So I just got to be a big White Sox fan because that's who I knew. One of my favorite memories was Juan Pizarro, one of the greatest Latin pitchers ever. He was so demonstrative. So when you're a young kid and you're growing up and you got the transistor radio under your pillow, listening to baseball games, there's not much better than that.
That's awesome. Neat way to fall in love with the game and to learn how to imagine it through the radio, which is really powerful. The influence of sport even bled into the way your teachers even used it. I understand you had a third grade teacher who understood how to take your love of sports and maybe use that to help you as a young boy to enjoy reading. Tell me about how that love of sports and other things bled together.
So I'm hearing impaired, and we didn't know till older how bad it was. You just missed it back then. When you're hearing impaired, it's very common to also have a speech impediment. They sort of go together. Things like reading out loud or learning how to say things, you stay away from that and you avoid it. And I just had a rough time reading, or people thought I had a rough time reading because they couldn't understand me very well. So kindergarten, first and second grades were very painful for me.
Hmm.
I was lucky enough. Congress Park Elementary School had a peach pathologist that would take me out of class. That's hard too, because you're literally leaving a class you're behind in. Then you're doing things you're not good in over and over and over again. In the long run, it helped me understand leadership, because leadership is handling failure and a lot of repetition. So when I got into third grade, I got into Mrs. James, and I don't know much about whether she had a master's or she was a reading specialist, but I do know she had what every great teacher has: is she helped you feel loved.
Hmm.
If you feel loved, you feel safe. And if you feel safe, you're willing to risk things. Mrs. James didn't have me read with the group. She pulled me aside and we did one-on-one reading. And a part of getting good at something is loving it enough that you'll go through the struggle to learn it. That's why I tell people, pick a career you love, because nothing goes undefeated. And because I wanted to learn sports so bad, she brought in the sports page.
Hmm.
So my reading instructors as a kid were Wendell Smith and Jerome Holtzman.
Great source writers.
And I got motivated, and she taught me to read with the Chicago sports page. And the other thing, Don, I'm really good at math, because if you love sports, you want to figure out the ERA, the batting
The
average.
stats, right?
So I'm still extremely good in math. So that's what you do. She figured out what I was passionate, and then she brought in something I was passionate about. And that's how I learned how to read.
That's a great, amazing personal anecdote and story, but filled with enormous business lessons as well. You made the point: find something you're passionate about, you'll go through the pain to get good at it. But beyond that, you'll use what you're good at maybe to help you grow into other spaces. That anecdote is just loaded with amazing leadership lessons that I'm going to guess played into your success over many, many years.
Well, a lot of times I talk about obstacles are opportunities. People that are really good leaders learn how to maximize obstacles. I didn't hear well, but I'm a good listener because I got to pay such close attention. You know, Malcolm in his work on outliers talks about repetition, repetition, repetition to be good. Well, I learned it early on, because if you have a speech impediment, you do something over and over and over again. That's hard, but then the discomfort becomes more comfortable. Well, that's what leadership is. That's what anything is. It's doing it enough till you get really good at it. Now, the hard part is if you're not passionate about it, you're not going to do it a lot. I know Bubba Watson quite well. People say, how's it to golf with Bubba Watson? I say, I don't know. I've never done it. I don't golf because I'm not passionate enough about it to go through the difficulty to get good at golf. I'll ride in a cart with you, but that's about it.
Yeah. So that idea about seeing obstacles as opportunities, you just hit it on the head. You've shared earlier that you were born deaf in your right ear, but you say it made you a better listener. I love that, taking that challenge, turning it into advantage. How do you model that idea in what you're leading and teaching other people, taking the challenge and turning it into an opportunity for growth?
Always use your own examples because people can relate to examples. I tell people don't compare, relate. Because when people compare, Don, you compare yourself out. Why I'm different, why you've got it better than me. If you can relate, you become where you can capture it. You look at an obstacle, for example, with the pandemic. There's nothing good in the pandemic. All of a sudden, people can't come in to see their doctor. Well, you know what it did? It just exploded telehealth. That was an obstacle that hospitals have been talking about for 15 years. We need to do better in telehealth. They really did it in about 6 months. Getting a vaccine, an obstacle. You know what they did? They learned how to streamline research and do it better. So I've learned the high performers are those that take obstacles and become opportunities. And, you look at our good friend Bubba, Bubba takes his personal struggles and he's learned more about himself. He's become a richer human being by going through the pain of discovering, because pain is many times the threshold of learning.
Yes, it is. And you're right. Bubba has been an extraordinary storyteller in that space. Been lucky enough to just finish a book with him, as you know, and that will come out this year. But also watching him grow as a storyteller around his struggle and how it can create opportunities for others is really amazing.
Ties into vulnerabilities. When people introduce me, they'll introduce me as, named one of the 40 smartest people in healthcare, most 100 powerful, best-selling author, boom, boom, boom. And I get up there and somehow during the talk, I talk about my alcoholism,
Mm.
39th year of sobriety. And everybody claps like crazy. They get more out of that. And that's another one of those obstacles. So, being a recovering alcoholic, I thought was a terrible thing to happen to me and ended up being the best thing that could happen to me because you learn to be self-aware and teachable. And that's really what the key of leadership is, or any success, is how self-aware am I and how coachable am I?
Self-aware and teachable. I'm taking just notes like crazy right now. But what strikes me is, we've talked a little bit about the idea that you didn't read a lot young for all these challenges. You had a speech impediment. Yet the two ways that I knew you before I was introduced by Bubba and his team and Randall, one of the things that really stood out to me was that you were a speaker and a writer.
Right.
And so I think that's really amazing that the two things that were weaknesses early in life become the two things for which you become quite well known.
It's interesting because I was passionate about both. I read every Chip Hilton book by Claire B that I could get my hands on. I would go to the store waiting for the new Chip Hilton book. And those of you that have been around, those are what I grew up with. And then I love the radio. I mean, I still listen to the radio at night. I listen to ball games all the time. Well, I had this dream of being like a radio announcer. Well, you got to sort of be able to speak if you're going to be a radio announcer. And then my passion truly, as you know, I started off as a teacher of special needs students.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because I was in a classroom with children with special needs for 10 years. They're not impressed with who you are. If you're boring, they're going to say, that's boring. So you sort of become pretty good on your feet when you got a tough audience like that.
That's awesome. So baseball wasn't your only love. You also were pretty good at soccer. And you at Lyons Township High School had a coach, John King, who gave feedback to you in an extraordinarily productive way, something that I know you weave into the way you give feedback to others. Can you share some of what Coach King shared?
Thank you, Donna. And you brought up some good points. Growing up, I was sensitive, afraid of failure because it just wasn't on a big undefeated streak here. I go to high school. I want to be in sports. I went to the largest high school in Illinois, 5,300 students, which meant if you weren't a pretty good athlete, you ain't going to play. Well, I'm 5 foot and about 100 pounds, so football was sort of out. The other fall sport was cross country, which I still don't know why people run just to run. And they just announced in 1965 there was going to be a new sport called soccer. But what I liked about it is because it was the first year they said they weren't going to cut anybody. And for a kid afraid of failure, those were magic words. So I went out and played on the freshman and sophomore team, and I met a guy named John King. John King grew up in India because his parents were like ministers that went to other countries on mission work. And that's where he learned soccer. So, I'm terrified of failure. I'm terrified of making a mistake. All of a sudden, I missed the soccer ball. And there's Coach King. Oh my gosh. And then all of a sudden, you hear Coach King clapping and clapping and tell me what a good job I did. He liked the way I hustled. He liked the way I went for the ball. And then he said, now, next time, get your foot out. But I really liked your hustle.
Mm-hmm.
What Coach King did is learn how to correct you without hurting you. What happens is if you don't have a good coach or a good leader, they put you in a cautious, fear-driven behavior mode, whether it's in business, whether it's in life, or so on. So my whole goal is to let people know I love them, I care about them, build up their confidence, and then do like Coach King did. Coach King did a method which we teach, what we call support, coach, support. Support the person, coach them, and come back with support. Way to hustle, way to get over there. Hey, make sure you get your foot out, but I really like the way you went after it.
That approach where you're actually bookending the instruction with kindness enough that it is heard more appropriately.
and you get the person to still want to do it, do you think he starts loving the game more or loving the game less? And isn't that what a coach really should be doing? Shouldn't they be coaching them to love the game even more than to improve the skill? It's to love the game.
Yeah. You know, in your business life, you've had an enormous successful career. Can you give me an example of how you would use support coach support around an incident or with someone that's worked for you in the past?
Sure. This just came up yesterday. We're trying to be a little more sizzly this year and get a different color. We have blue seats and we put the name of the season ticket holder on it. One of our employees wanted to, instead of putting like more of a grayish color, to put a pink. I met with him and he said, I'm really disappointed because I really love this pink color. And the president of the team said, no, we can't use pink. So I called the president of the team and said, well, this fella heard he can't use pink. He said, no, I didn't say that. I said, we can use pink if it doesn't fade. But if it fades, we got to go back to the gray because so on. So I said, well, obviously between what you said and what happened, it just didn't work. Jonathan, I love the way you're out there. I think what you did would made all the sense in the world to look at the long-term effect of changing colors. Really smart thinking on your part. I think what happens is you assume your person that reports to you is going to relay and cascade the message exactly like you told it. He's a younger leader. He probably doesn't understand that. So one of the things I'd recommend is have him practice how he's going to message what you just said to the workforce so he messages correctly, because he's young, he's inexperienced. And I think that'll be really helpful. But John, I want to tell you once again, I always love the fact that you're looking around the corners and looking for the long-term success of the company.
Beautiful. There you go.
That happened yesterday.
There's your bookends. That's awesome. You ultimately go on to Wisconsin Whitewater. As we mentioned earlier, you work as a special education teacher at Parker High School and Harvard High School. Now, you mentioned having to be interesting in order to do well in the classroom, especially in front of special needs children. Are there other lessons from life and work in athletics and time that help make you be better and more connective with students as a young teacher?
100%. When I was going to school at Whitewater, which was a great experience back then, and for your listeners who are way younger than me, which are 99% of them, when a person had a child that had special needs, sometimes it was recommended they go in an institution or a colony, is what they were called. Especially children with Down syndrome would be put in a colony or an institution.
Mm.
And then Mark Gold went into these institutions and took a complex Schwinn bike brake, and by breaking it in down to small parts, taught people they thought had no capability of learning how to take apart and put together a Schwinn bike brake, and did very good at it. What he did, it's been one of my keys to my success, taking complex things and break it down to simple parts that it can be repetitive. So if you look at leadership, if you look at any skill, people get caught up in making something complex. If you really know something, the key is you take complexity and you make it simple. When you make it simple, you make it where you can do it. So I think the key is it doable? Can I execute? Can I do it over and over again to any skill? So taking the complexity and breaking it into small parts. The other thing, Don, which is really interesting, according to Franklin Covey research, somebody can probably do 2 behavioral changes at a time and have success. And when you put the third one in, you cut the success ratio in half. When you put the fourth one in, you drop it all the way down to maybe a 1 in 4 chance of success.
Yeah.
When we're teaching anything from sports to life, you might know there are going to be 6 things they have to do, but you break it down into just, here's the first. Let's get this right. Then we'll add the second one. Then we'll add the third one. So I think leadership is all about taking complexity, breaking it down into simple components, and then sequencing how you're teaching those components.
That's beautiful. What a great lesson. And you're learning that there in that world as an instructor and as a teacher. But after a decade, you ultimately leave teaching and you end up in the healthcare world. And in healthcare, you climb the ladder quite impressively. I know that in 1996, you became the administrator of Baptist Hospital. And to be successful in that role, I understand that an important element for you was you sought out reverse mentoring from another one of your teammates. Can you tell me a little bit about you seeking that kind of mentoring and what lesson we can take from that?
So basically, like you said, once I got into healthcare, I moved up much quicker than the norm for a guy who didn't have a master's in healthcare and MBA. Now I'm president of a hospital, a big, large hospital. And, when we think of mentoring, we always think of an older person teaching a younger person, but it can go the other way too. So we had a bad month at Baptist Hospital. I was really depressed. I was sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I moved my family to Florida. My wife wasn't too gung ho on that, saying that humidity's tough. And I'd been on a real success run at Mercy and then in Holy Cross. And it's almost like I was really hot in AA and real hot in AAA. And I'm like Willie Mays, I'm off to a bad start here. Am I going to fail here? So I really vented a little bit at this administration meeting of my direct reports. Then I'd like, I don't know if we can do it. Maybe we can't, blah, blah, blah. And Dick Fulford, who was older than me, worked for me. He ran a small hospital called Gulf Breeze Hospital, and he was very, very good. Dick Fulford said, hey, can I talk to you for a second? Pulled me out in the middle of the meeting, looked at me. I felt like John Wayne was looking at me, and he said, you can't do this. They're looking for you for leadership. They're looking for you for inspiration. And you're sitting here and talking defeat. You need to go in there and you need to be more positive. And he was right. And I went in there and was more positive. So that's the courage of somebody to care enough about the organization that they'll do something they're uncomfortable with. I call it, Don, spinach in your teeth. If you love somebody, you tell them they have spinach in your teeth. And they're appreciative. And if you really don't love somebody or don't know somebody, you'll just let them walk around the whole day with spinach in their teeth.
That is as graphic and as perfect an example as one could imagine for this concept of willingness to speak truth to other people. You have to be open, though, for others to be able to speak truth to you. And I think that's pretty powerful that he was able to do that. I assume you continued to be able to have him as a close advocate for quite some time.
Well, he passed away this year, and I will tell you, I knew him. He came to ball games. He had Alzheimer's right at the end. And I was lucky enough to write a column, because I write weekly columns, and just talk about Mr. Fulford. And it was sort of cool because I always called him Mr. Fulford. I don't know why. I just did.
We'll be back after this.
Your business phone service should not be complicated to set up, manage, and use. Nextiva connects your phone system with business apps, AI, and automation on a single platform to run your business. With their easy-to-use dashboard, you will be able to connect with your team and customers all in one place. Nextiva, powering communication across the Pac-12 and now the Corporate Competitor Podcast.
Welcome back to Corporate Competitor Podcast. Childhood love of baseball comes full circle in 2002 when the opportunity to own an independent league baseball team comes your way there in Pensacola. And then in 2010, you get to step up and purchase a minor league team that today is the Pensacola Blue Wahoos. I love them. Such a fun team. What's it been like to own a team in a sport that means so much to you?
I think it's been a great learning experience. You got to be real careful because you're still running an organization that has to operate well. You can't let your love for baseball overwhelm it to the point where you miss running a great operation. So even though you'd love to pay a lot of attention on the field, your whole job is off the field. Now, some of the great things are, to sit in a dugout at a home run derby with Tony La Russa, to be spending time with Walt Jocketty. So I think it's really been exciting. It's been a thrill to be involved with this, to get to see it. I'm lucky enough that I'm chairman of the operations committee for all of minor league baseball. So I get to see people at Major League Baseball's headquarters, and unbelievable respect. What a rough year they've had.
Yeah. You made a great point there that your attraction and fascination had always been with on the field. But now, as an owner and in the role that you play, you have to be thinking about how do we fill the stands, right? How do we keep people in the seats?
Yeah.
That's one of the beauties of minor league ball. Their willingness to try and be creative and do things that no one would ever try at the major league level. What's been your favorite?
This is not going to probably be really I'll give you, when I had an independent team, we had whoopee cushion night. The goal was to break the Guinness Book of Records for how many people could sit on a whoopee cushion at the same time. We found a sponsor immediately that wanted to provide whoopee cushions to everybody. And at one time, we had everybody sit on a whoopee cushion at the exact same time. So I know that sounds probably just crazy, but it was sort of fun and it sort of worked.
So these crazy ideas that you have, like the whoopee cushion idea, or even within your own team, I mean, some really cool things like when COVID shuts down the ballpark, you turn it into a disc golf facility. You let your stadium actually become an Airbnb, which gained international attention as a news story. How do you get people together to generate these ideas?
You create a safe enough environment where people aren't afraid of looking silly. They're not afraid of throwing an idea out because everything I just told you, none of them were my ideas.
Mm.
Now, as a leader, what you want to do is create the environment where people will provide ideas. You have to learn how to turn down an idea without turning down the person. Because what happens is if someone gives me an idea and I say, oh, I already thought of it or why that won't work, they quit giving them. We have to go back down and tell the person it wasn't the idea of putting pink on our seats that was bad. It was, would they hold so you don't have to spend a ton of money changing them every year? So how do you turn down an idea without turning off the person? And then the third one is the way I look at it. If it doesn't hurt anyone, if it's not illegal, and if it's not going to cost a fortune, what do we got to lose?
Right.
I'm going to give you a health story, Don, because it's sort of cute. I was President Baptist Hospital, and we had 3 big buildings that were physician clinic offices. And between the two, there was a long hallway. And one of the ideas from one of the employees was people are walking, and some of them are elderly, and they're walking from the medical office to get an x-ray, and they get tired. They lean against the wall. Could we put benches along that hallway? And immediately people want to come up with why not? Oh, we can't do that. Fire safety rules. Well, why don't we just throw them up there and see what happens? Heck, we had fire department people sitting on these benches. So you also have to be willing to have some misses. Create a safe environment to get ideas. Learn how to turn down ideas without devastating the person and be willing to have some flops. The challenge I find, Don, is people immediately come up with why it won't work. And you've got to get past that. Why not? You want to figure out a culture of yes instead of a culture of no.
Well, that is the beauty, as we were talking about. One of the things about minor league baseball in particular is that you go to the games at minor league baseball expecting fully that you're going to be entertained somewhere, right?
Now we're selling mullet stuff like crazy right now. You know, we did a naming contest, which people go wild over. Don't change that name. So the Blue Ajos were number 1, and the other name was mullet. And I sort of liked mullet. And, you know, I sort of had a mullet back then. Anyway, and I didn't know Bubba that well. So basically, people would write me notes. Oh, you can't name it the mullet. It would make a laughing stock of our community and blah, blah, blah. Like people really pay attention. So about 2 years ago, we came out with mullet stuff. This year, we're selling more mullet hats and mullet jerseys than we are Pensacola Blue Wahoos, that the team's going to be the Mullets, I think, once every homestand. So, yeah, you got to have some fun, as long as it doesn't hurt people. We never want to hurt people. We're very sensitive. We always want to be family oriented. But as long as it's fun, you know, let's have some fun. Let's have some high energy here.
Yeah. You used the phrase earlier about creating a safe environment for people to be able to express themselves. Any tips on how those of us who might also be building out organizations might be able to replicate the safe environment that you're referencing?
Yeah, it's not easy because people even have preconceived notions. Well, they'll turn it down. Well, have you asked them? No, I haven't really asked them yet. You've got to be able to create brainstorming and shut up. You got to let the thing flow. And when you're the boss, it's so easy to say why something won't work. So you've got to sort of keep your big mouth shut, I call it. I'll even put down on a piece of paper, keep my big mouth shut, and I'll alphabetize it a little bit. Number 2, you've got to let people know they can challenge you. Again, I've been in healthcare a long time. CEO will say, well, Quint, people won't challenge me. Well, that's because you're intimidating. They'll say, no, I'm not intimidating. I said, I'm intimidated. You're just telling you you're intimidating. You know, a lot of times in a work environment, people won't challenge their boss in front of people. And I'm not talking about, threatens. I'm talking about, I don't know if that'll work. What about this? Find a time when somebody sort of challenges you a little bit and ask them to hold off and do it at your next meeting.
Mm.
And then show how you can handle it. Like, all right, you're right. We have a fellow, Daniel Venn in media. He's very good at telling me, I don't know if that'll work or don't worry about that. And usually I lean his way. I go their way, or Nicole Webb Bodie that works for Studer Community Institute and so on. The third one is be very, very careful not to say, I already thought of that or I'm ahead of you. Because if you bring me an idea, Don, and even though I've already thought of it, when I say, hey, Don, I already thought of that, you're not going to give me the second idea because I've already thought of it. Those are both idea killers because you tell people not to come up with ideas because you're smarter than them. You thought of it. You're ahead of them. Even if you already thought of it, say, hey, great idea. I like that. So you got to deflate your ego.
Right.
The fourth one is not to get caught up in is we tried it and that didn't work. It's a different time. Sometimes things that didn't work 3 years ago might work perfect today.
Correct.
My company's doing a gratitude symposium and it's going to be real popular. I don't know if it would have worked 3 years ago, but it's sure going to work right now.
Because people need gratitude right now.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to be able to go back.
Right.
My wife owns a cooking area. And 6 years ago, they tried to bring an outside chef to do cooking classes and it didn't go that well. But they're doing it again now and it's going to go great.
Yeah.
Because things change. Be willing to come back to some things that maybe didn't work before. And then the last thing is you got to be okay if something doesn't work. You got to be able to say, so what? It didn't work, but so what? We learned something. It was a good try. I appreciate you thinking of it. Perfectionism is what kills innovation.
Wow. That is strong. Thank you. That is beautiful. So do you build brainstorming sessions into your calendar? Is it a regular piece of your weekly journey?
No, but it will be now, Don, because I even like that idea a lot myself.
I'm glad to know you didn't say, I already thought of that, Don.
No, I think I think we sort of do it, but I don't think we do it as well as we can. Now, I will say the Blue Wahoo staff, in the last 6 weeks, I said, let's not be complacent. I don't want anything repeated that we've ever done before at the ballpark.
Wow.
Nothing. I want this year to be everything new. Now, Don, we might bring some things back, but you got to swing the pendulum way over. So seeing that, I said, nothing's repeatable this year. I've been meeting with the Wahoos over the last 2 days, and they're having a ball. When somebody would get a ticket, we just write back, here's your ticket. Now they made a video that when a person buys a ticket, they get a video, one of our staff members being so excited that they've gotten a ticket. So I think you've got to create enough creative tension between where we are and where we want to be that people know they have to think differently because thinking like they would is not going to be acceptable.
I love it. We mentioned earlier our mutual friend, Bubba Watson, somebody that we both admire. And in 2015, you actually invited him to join the ownership group of the baseball team. Now, Bubba was also a lover of the game of baseball as a kid, just as you were. What have you learned having a partner like Bubba Watson, somebody who is just maniacal about how good he can be in his space? What has he taught you as a partner?
So I didn't want a celebrity investor. I didn't need a celebrity investor. I wanted somebody who's going to make us better. I want more intellectual capital at the table. Bubba, as you know, what he told me when I first met him, he said, I'm a good golfer, but I'm great in public relations. So you wanted somebody that is creative, somebody that gets excited. He's very passionate. Heck, if you look at his candy store, he gets very excited about what a cupcake's going to look like on the top or what candy's going to be. So I wanted somebody creative that would bring creativity into the organization. I wanted somebody that didn't think they were better than. So, for example, we don't do any breaks for anybody, including me. Bubba gets it. Bubba pays for his tickets, pays for his food. He understands that we're all about a workforce. And how can he make the employees feel special? How can he make the employees feel better? If he's at a game and we're giving out pins to employees, which we do every game on the dugout, thanking them for their work, Bubba's out there giving their pins. If it's an orientation and he's in town, he's at new employee orientation. So it's basically looking at operations and getting us better. Also, he can teach the players some very valuable lessons. He just did the captain's camp for the Miami Marlins. I don't know if he tell you that story.
Yes.
Let me tell you my side of the story. So I get a call from Jeff DeGroat, the head of minor league baseball for the Marlins. That's a Saturday. He goes, Quint, we do this camp. We teach leadership. We're looking for someone to talk to the players about leadership and community. And he's asking me,
Yeah.
Don, I've already got my flight to Jupiter planned. I'm wondering if I'm going to be sitting with Derek Jeter. And then when he gets all done, he goes, do you think Bubba Watson could come speak to the players? So Bubba comes into the locker room and talks to the players. And what's beautiful is the players all line up for photos and autographs. And then he leaves. And then I say to the players, what would you thought of Bubba if he didn't sign autographs?
Mm.
What would you think of Bubba if he walked past you? You have to ask yourself, how do you want to be viewed? And it makes them understand that they need to do autographs and they need to do photos, because Bubba Watson is a great human being, as is his wife, Angie.
Yes.
To me, I love Bubba Watson if he never picked up a golf club, never hit a golf ball. And I love Angie. That's what people have to realize about the Watsons.
Wow. I love listening to you talk about him and him talk about the relationship. I do want to ask you, the general premise of our podcast has always been that research shows that there is this ability for those who have participated in sports to grow because of what they learned on soccer fields or baseball diamonds, and ultimately allows some people to become better leaders. What's your thought on that premise?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, it helps you become coachable. Let's think about that. There's two things in my book, Busy Leader Handbook. I asked people who've invested in companies, venture capitalists, what are the most important things you look for when you make an investment in a company? And they told me self-awareness. Now, if you play sports, you are getting self-awareness. They really are. We have a Southern Youth Sports Association here in town run by Lumen May. It's a lot of children from lower socioeconomic. I went to one of their basketball practices, and they talked more about how to behave, how not to get in trouble than they did how to dribble and bounce a ball. And they told them about the chances of you getting a scholarship or playing pro is very, very slim. So let's talk about what really you need to know. So I think self-awareness is vital. The second thing is coachability. So when you walk out of playing a sport, you've picked up self-awareness and coachability. I believe, Don, only those two things alone are 80 to 90% of success in life. If you're self-aware, you know where you're strong, but you also know where you need improvement. And if you're coachable, you can get the opportunity for improvement. That's what sports does. And then there's all the other things, from teamwork to sacrifice. But, I like taking very complex to simple. It's self-awareness and coachability.
That is beautiful. Quint Studer, I could talk to you all day, but I love the lessons you teach and the life journey you've made to be able to teach them.
I'm so honored, being a Chicago guy. I remember when Walter Payton passed away. And I remember when the skyscraper had number 34 on it. And as you know, you were very close to Walter Payton. I believe you were in his house the final days of his life.
Yes.
You're a great writer, but more important than that, you're just a great human being, Don. And I'm just absolutely honored to know you as a person.
Well, Quint, thank you. Thank you for today. And thank you for being a corporate competitor.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Looking at my notes, my takeaways from Quint were these. First, no matter how successful you become, stay self-aware. Don't get caught up in your own press clippings. Second, always be ready to learn. Know that others will teach you if you show a willingness to learn. And finally, as a leader, be available to your team so that trust and creativity abounds. Quint mentioned his friend and business partner, two-time Masters champion Bubba Watson. To listen to my fascinating conversation with Bubba, visit episode 48. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir. How
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.